The Worldview of Paul Cezanne, a Psychic Interpretation by JaneRoberts. Chapter 5. Was God civil when he made thunderstorms? Cezanne on nature, the conventions, and the artist's personal life. The next week, we started preparing for Christmas. There were snow flurries now and then. The mail got heavier. We started thinking about having a small holiday party. Yet, with all that, it was the continuing Cezanne script rather than the season that added a new, spicy psychological texture to our lives. Or rather, the coming holiday and the Cezanne script merged in our minds, each enhancing the other. Rob kept coming into my small studio with his, "How's my Christmas present coming? Any more Cezanne?" And both of us wondered what would develop. More than this, of course, the manuscript contained a flavor and feeling that captivated us both. Worldview, or whatever, the love of painting and the sense of dedication to it were brilliantly clear, plus a knowledge that many painters would dearly desire to possess. Just about each day, no matter what else I was involved with, and at no predetermined time, I'd suddenly know that Cezanne was ready. I might be at my desk or doing the dishes or anything at all. My activities seemed to make no difference. Each time I followed the procedure, I'd started from the first, putting Cezanne's name down at the top of the paper, and almost at once the material began. The manuscript was taking shape with its own odd integrity, sense of purpose, and undeviating nature. It did seem like a journal without preliminaries or frills, the contents of a painter's mind. Entry number 6, December 16, 1975, 12:30 to 1 p.m. The artist knows better than any scientist in a way beyond measurements. The scientist's eye is clouded to his own private vision, for he tries to see the world as he thinks it must appear to all men. He deals with similarities without necessarily realizing that similarities arise out of differences. A botanist may never have a real feeling for flowers, for example, for he may lump them so together that one painting of a flower may carry a greater message than all of his information. At the same time, such a botanist may take flowers out of their context in that he may ignore the larger environment in which they grow. The artist, by cherishing the reality of objects such as fruit, can imply their inner vitality by not defining their edges too definitely, and by the clever use of color, he can imply even a ripe fruit, its pre-ripe and post-ripe stages, so that it is given motion in time. And by not settling it too securely, he can also give it mobility in space. On a tree, apples move. On a table, that ability or characteristic is still a part of apples, even though the opportunity or conditions of motion are diminished. A rock, though secured, will still move if given the chance, and so also possess the possibility of motion. Even the heaviest of mountains is composed of living objects, each in its own way capable of motion. Tree branches wave in the wind, small stones fall in miniature rock slides, and little brooks carry leaves downhill. So mountains should also be built up of various layers of alive paint, successfully applied with the quick strokes that in themselves imply motion. Mud in nature is not muddy either, but composed of its own brilliant transparency. Earth colors, muted but not diluted, brilliant to themselves in their own context. Not heavy. Mud is also mobile and slides, and the heaviest dirt can still be held in the hand and slide between the fingers. So above all, the artist must remember the quickening that is within the most rested object. The wind is not an object, yet its effects must be shown as it touches and moves objects, and everywhere, even in the most closed studio, there are movements of the air. Backgrounds, then, should always suggest an unevenness of light, shadow, and motion, implied or anticipated. Even a painted wall background should carry these implications. The shadows of objects extend them in space, but where does the shadow actually begin and end? Conventions demand that the shadows end in such and such a place, but if the artist looks carefully, there are innumerable blendings and subshapes where shadows merge, so that, for example, no wall area is flat, but in a way dappled, and actually the objects in a room are etched in a fashion upon its walls. The next entry is 3:50 to 4:30 p.m. While shape and form are to be respected, they are not to be delineated with too rigid strokes, for there is a suggestive quality in the objects of nature which also must be expressed. Of course, one object again suggests others. As the toy evokes the image of the child, a knife that of a fork, and so forth. An apple in this respect can suggest an apple tree or an orchard, but objects can suggest less concrete values also, as one flower in its prime suggests spring, while another in its greatest bloom evokes autumn. When selecting flowers for still lifes, therefore, this should be taken into consideration, for flowers as living objects will carry the implications of the various seasons in which they are characteristic. The artist must know, say, in mixing spring and fall flowers in one still life, that he is using flowers that do not themselves usually appear side by side. So such a still life will be intrinsically different from one in which seasonal flowers appear together, even though the painting methods are the same. One bloom can suggest summer, yet an entire field of summer flowers is still somehow more than the entire collection of flowers and trees that may compose it. That added something has to do with a deeper kind of suggestion that hovers around objects. It is partially composed of their texture, size, shape, coloring, and yet it cannot be found in any one of those values or even in their combination. Still, it is the artist's duty to express this added suggestibility. An apple is always an apple and will never become an orange, and yet an apple suggests the entire kingdom of fruits and also evokes judgments and values that have nothing to do with the visual arts per se, and yet have always been connected with them. The apple has religious connotations, and no matter how innocent the artist finds the apple, to some it will suggest the fall from the Garden of Eden. We say the fruits of the earth, meaning the gifts of nature. So most people cannot understand why an artist paints fruits in various stages of ripeness or decay. For to them, anything overripe often carries unpleasant connotations. So most people want fresh fruits in their still lifes and fresh faces in their portraits. Those values are in people's minds and have nothing to do with the objects that may be involved. Still, the artist must be aware of such judgments and use them to his advantage. Otherwise, they can work against him, at least in some people's opinions. Those who say an apple is an apple have never looked clearly at one apple to see how different it is from all the others and how alike. So the artist in his still life must show of fruit singularity while still leaving room for the playing of suggested mental motion, so that the apple, being itself also free to suggest apples in general. The next entry is from 7 o'clock to 7:45 p.m. Besides the quick, striking brush stroke, and I will say more about brush strokes later, color must carry the action of the painting, advancing or modulating it, and it is a good thing to remember that a fully stated color is a hard act to follow. That is, such a combination of color and value is so emphatic that it will imply by itself complete action beyond any further development. If prime color is handled in this manner, fully stated in hue and value alike, then the effect can be to stop the painting's action at that point, for beyond it there is, color-wise, nowhere for it to go. A color's values are supremely important in that they let me start that sentence again. A color's values are supremely important in that they mete out action in small doses, contrast, gradations of anticipated motion, and give action and light an inner framework to climb upon or to leap over. Without the framework of the values, however, colors seem suspended or uprooted. Or unrooted. Color seems suspended or unrooted. That is, the lesser values prepare a bed for the stronger ones, and in that way support the painting's greatest action. The prime colors carry the swiftest motion, and the reds and yellows, used in small doses, carrying the action across the canvas in whatever direction the artist desires. The blues and greens do likewise, but they can also modulate themselves better. No value of a red really disappears, for example, where a blue or green can, for practical purposes, disappear while still serving its purposes. The blues and greens can unite opposing or seemingly opposing elements in a painting. They can slide past each other. There should be varying amounts of paint on a canvas so that it is not covered uniformly like a blanket, but room allowed for the canvas to breathe here and there. Grass, for instance, needs more a feeling of openness in this manner than buildings or jars that are not in that respect alive. Excuse me. But uniform layers will not give the impression of lively grass. So the layers of paint should be as uneven as the earth itself is. A vase, being more or less uniform in thickness, can be painted in many layers, each adding solidarity, and still the strokes of the brush should not act to smother those strokes beneath it, but ride astride, overlapping. While an artist is justifiably pleased with the steadiness of his hand, at times a sudden agitated perfect brush stroke will give such illumination to a painting as a stroke of lightning. On other occasions, weight on one side of the brush over another will justify a stroke that would be mediocre if the pressure were equal, and bring about variation in color value, minute but highly attractive, that move the painting's action forward. It is also good to remember that the brush acts against the canvas's grains, and that its characteristics affect the strokes, smoothing them out, filling them in, rejecting or accepting the paint to whatever degree. The paint must adhere but not sink into the ground. In a way, the colors are like an army, and the artist must be the general, otherwise they will advance or retreat on their own, like scattered troops, not working together but involved in skirmishes among themselves. Painting is like a battle in many ways, a series of engagements of the artist with the vision and the canvas as the background. Hopefully, the result is a creative victory, but in any case, the artist must hold his ground. I do not mean that he must lord it over his painting or pretend to be its master, for humbly the artist knows that he was himself created as he is creating. In that regard, he should not judge his work too harshly, lest the great creator look upon his, the artist's, own faults with as stern an eye. Still, he must be master of the colors and also giving them a certain freedom. And the next entry is number 7, and it's dated December 17th, 1975, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Each artist must be the artist to himself, for the world that he creates must be his private vision, as the physical world is God's private vision. God has no one to rely upon, and he depended upon no other's ideas of what the world should be. That is why he is God. The moment he doubted his own authority in such matters, he would fall from his high estate. So the artist in his own way must form a new world from his raw materials, those available to him in terms of paint, canvas, brush, and so forth, and those available in his own character. For the artist must share the materials of his art with all other artists. That limitation is placed upon him. He can use those materials differently, but he must use the same tools of the craft that are available to all. So what the artist does with those shared materials is what is important. To use them to their advantage, he must mine those individual raw materials that he shares with no one else, his own characteristics, leanings, abilities, and idiosyncrasies, these most of all. Using those raw materials, he transforms all else, and from the same physical materials available to all others, he creates paintings that are his own and unlike any others, because each stroke of his brush follows inner strokes of sensation that strike the artist's own soul, and these he transfers to canvas. It takes patience and alertness to differentiate these true strokes which come from the artist's knowledge of himself, from those counterfeit strokes which come from the ideas that he has accepted from others about how a painting should be done. He must use his own characteristics as he uses color, mixing them cleverly, using them to advantage, highlighting some, modulating others, while still, as with colors, remaining master of them. Sometimes they must be used with full strength, as with a prime color, for there are prime characteristics in an artist, as there are prime colors in paints. The artist must be familiar with each. You cannot know your own characteristics and use them in painting if you do not allow them some freedom otherwise, demanding only that they come out on call at your request. So there is a period when an artist must learn to recognize his prime characteristics, use and study them as he does his colors. Then and only then, armed with this knowledge, can he use them to proper advantage in his art. Conventional goodness, civility, and piety are for men who do not know themselves. So they do as they are told, or they behave like everyone else does. They fear that left alone, they would never be civil or good or pious. Was God civil when he made the thunderstorms? Nonsense. The artist must know his own moods and not get in the habit excuse me, of acting one way when he feels another. If he feels good, gigantic in goodwill when he feels good, and terrible like an angry giant when he feels bad, then he must know this and not pretend otherwise, or he will become blunted to the motion within himself. That motion in his direct personal response, no, that motion is his direct personal response to the world at any given time. In other words, his contrast will be gone. Saying good day automatically is equally nonsense and denies the actual feelings of those involved by standardizing response, making it conventionally pleasant at the expense of individual feeling. An artist must respect the direct honesty of his emotions, but people are not used to being dealt with honestly, so they are often outraged by the artist's behavior. Yet the artist is responsible for bringing his feelings into some kind of control after he understands them, where most men depend upon society to do it for them. In this way, the artist may make mistakes, but these are his own at least, and if they are often reflected in his work, so his triumphs will be also. When people ask about an artist's personal life, they do not understand that his deepest personal life is his work, that level of his being where he does not deal with other persons but himself. His family life is not his deepest concern. It is that part of his personal life that he must share with others. He is affected by his family and by his relationships with others, but I dare say that if the artist had another family than the one he has, he would still be an artist and still have a personal life. It is his work that was separate. Other men may be fathers, husbands, sons, as the artist may be, but in his work, an artist creates alone in a way that few can understand. Sometimes even the artist does not understand. If a man makes spoons or clothing or reaps grain for people to eat, then everyone involved understands the purpose of his labor. The baker does not have to ask himself the purpose of bread, but has only to take a bite and feel the stomach swell. But no one really understands what a painting is for or its purpose. Critics are always giving different theories, but the artist, who it seems should know, knows least of all. Yet, more than many, because he finally comes to realize that the answer is not knowable. He only knows that he must do what he does, whether or not the function of his labor is understood. A painting, you may say, is to look at, but people do not need to look at pictures in the same way as they need to eat. A painting of a loaf of bread does not serve the same purpose as a chunk of bread. So all the while that an artist paints, he also wonders about the purpose involved in his activity. When his paintings are rejected, he wonders, for who but a Mad Hatter would make hats that no one liked or would buy? Yet stubbornly he knows that there is an unknown function to his art and a hidden purpose that is only opaquely related to people's desire to decorate their walls. Some people read, for example, to while away the hours or to learn definite disciplines like history or geography or to escape. Yet a painting can be seen quickly, and it delivers no definite information outside its own features. Worse, many more people know how to read books than know how to read paintings. Yet men continue to be artists. Entry number 8, December 18th, 1975, 5:30 to 6:45 a.m. Sculpture, at least, can be touched, and religious sculptures serve a definite purpose, as political sculptures do. Yet, sculpture must isolate a subject from its environment. The statue of a soldier on his horse, for example, must appear without landscape or sky, and except for the greatest of works, statues are more like caricatures of life than expressions of it. In a way, the medium is too literal, and the more lifelike and objective the statue, the more the viewer is reminded of its rigidity and weight in comparison to the human form. Only the most exquisite art can lift sculpture from that unpleasant comparison, for the very stone itself lacks the natural contours that it possesses, say, in cliffs, with perhaps grasses growing in its crevices and with the sunlight playing about its surfaces. The earth pigments, on the other hand, come from natural elements with a quicker life speed, from the ground itself, which forever shifts, which produces the trees and flowers and possesses a more lively nature. Perhaps cavemen artists imagined that if they collected pigments from the earth and then painted representations of the earth's objects, the objects would spring alive. For were such drawings not dipped in nature's own life and then shaped into earth's replica? If grass rises from dirt, might not grass that was painted come to life if it were painted from dirt's pigments? The ground recreates fauna. But even cavemen must have known the rocks did not reproduce their own kind. Wood carvings would seem superior to stone statues, since wood in nature grows. Stone may be a proper medium to express the presence of saints or religious personages who are known dead, but it fails miserably in any attempt to express the living person. In a painting, the artist can rearrange nature to his heart's content. Besides this, the artist knows that any segment of nature, say a particular field, is never the same. Obviously, it changes with the seasons, but it also is different from one moment to another. Even its mass seems to alter itself in the shafts of light that come and vanish. Sometimes the shadows appear to be deeper than the real gullies or caverns, and on occasion the same gullies can even seem as shallow as spoonfuls of thin, dark liquid. But the same natural objects can change to such a degree that the entire landscape is different in appearance, even though the separate objects may still be recognizably the same. Any Any painting convention overrides such effects and conventionalizes an artist's perception so that he no longer sees with his own eyes, but, for example, always paints shadows, thus and so, and always uses the same brush strokes to signify this or that. He may use the palette knife like a butcher on one occasion with just the results he wants, but only a fool would always use the palette knife in such a manner, for it can also be the most delicate of tools, delineating the softness of a flower with astonishing subtleness. Yet many artists follow conventions that dictate how the brush or palette knife should be used, where nature, of course, varies its strokes, whether they be strokes of a wave or shadow or the blade of grass. There is little equal in nature, either the lay of the land, the colors of the flowers, or the shades of the sky. So a painting should not be even either in strokes or layers of paint or balance, yet a painting must be united as nature is, where unevenness itself attains an overall uneven balance. The artist must also be aware of his own conventions for some methods that suit his mood and purpose. One day may suddenly no longer do so on the next. The artist must remember that he changes as the landscape before him does. He will also go through stages, though he may not recognize them as such until later, imagining each stage to be the final one, or the nearest one to the hopes of his achievement. In the meantime, in each stage, he will have evolved certain methods, ways of using pigment, arranging the canvas, and so forth, that work well so that the artist overall has a peculiar unity. So that the work overall has a peculiar unity of its own, that the artist may be loath to lose. Yet one day, while happily following through with these methods, he will suddenly strike upon something new. It need be nothing more than a different way to use his brush, or the discovery of a vanishing value that before he took for granted. It may simply be that between 1 minute and the next he perceives the dimensions of the canvas in an unfamiliar manner. The moment he acts on his discovery, the previous stage of his painting is already in disarray, and a new one is coming up. The artist must be brave enough then to give up something that's been working for him, for the unknown again. For that new quality, whatever it is, will transform his art once again. It may be that the previous stage was pleasant to others, so that the artist was assured of sales and hence of freedom to paint. Yet he must give up even that security if his art is to evolve in its own way. Sometimes it's good for an artist to deliberately begin a painting in a different manner from his usual one, or to change his palette, to work outside if he is accustomed to his studio, or vice versa. So, to do portraits instead of still lifes, or otherwise change his most intimate work habits. Often, this divergence will return to him in unusual ways, refreshed with additional knowledge. The artist must understand his own moods, rhythms, and characteristics, however, for sometimes a problem in painting can be worked out directly and sometimes only opaquely or indirectly. The next entry is entry number 9, December 19th, 1975, 11 a.m. till noon. Generally speaking, most people express themselves through the world as it is. They let their existence flow through the available conventions, social and professional groupings, government or religious organizations, and through these means they express themselves. To some extent, they disperse themselves so automatically into these ready-made cultural forms that their own inner feelings are never directly encountered. The artist is always making a new world. That is his body of work. The artist is always making a new world. That is his body of work. He is always encountering himself because he is not dispersing himself as others do. His stability, such as it is his work. It is not sanctioned by convention. By taking himself out of that context, however, he is more aware of his sensations and reactions than others, who have more or less automatic pockets in which to place them. Love goes to the family or the church, hatred to the despoilers of church, prosperity, life, or state, envy against the rich, and so forth. The artist has no place to put his emotions in those terms, and sometimes his own feelings astonish him. His emotional experience is more vivid in many ways. For this reason, that he does not disperse it. With its energy, he forms his new worlds of pictures. For all of this, the artist's goals are often unknown to him, except as they unfold. In this fashion, he goes on faith more than other men. His medium is not primarily one of words at all. So often, even his thoughts have shape and form, without what is considered reason's substance. Not that his thoughts may not be reasonable, but that his intuitions and purposes are shapes to him rather than words, a vocabulary of pigment, light, and shadow, rather than letters, for his vision is concerned with inner substance in a different way than, say, a writer's is. The artist is really obsessed with the mystery of how substance appears, seemingly from nowhere, into the objects, forms, and shapes of the natural world. He is intrigued by the difference in substance between a solid object and its shadow, and by the fact that any given object, while seemingly itself is different when he views it from another perspective or another light, or even when he changes only his subjective point of view. How do shapes come into the world? When do they change into other shapes? A field can be seen as one object with many parts, or one flower can be seen as a whole in itself. And the world changes according to how you organize your emotions or your palette. A man who does not know his colors will not know nature well. Just a minute. Let me start that sentence over again. A man who does not know his colors will not know nature well enough to do a good landscape, because he will not perceive the earth's many hues. They will be missing inside the man, so he cannot objectify them. If trees grew words rather than leaves, I would be a writer. If trees grew words rather than leaves, I would be a writer. But trees grow leaves, which are images, and substance, so I am an artist. I think that the world was created the way that images arise in an artist's mind. Only his creativity is limited to canvas. A painting must show this give and take between motion, flow, fluidity, and shape, form, and mass. There is motion in all objects, and shape in all motion. Most people, however, want their objects to stay objects and to be shown as such, because people live in a conventionalized world in which perceptions are standardized. The elements of the natural world are primarily visual, and if the hills were made of ever-ascending musical notes, I would be a musician. But any hill is a visual statement, apparent in its gradations of substance, light and shadow, in which color is everywhere intermingled, both in things with substance and in things seemingly without it. The sky is full of color, but innocent of objects in accepted terms. And water is the same. It can be viewed as one flowing, moving object, forming subshapes that are never constant, but always present within it. In a still life, this is reversed. Objects predominate, and the flowing motion is suggested, flowing around them, through them, past them, as the water flows around rocks in a stream. The ripples in streams are transitory objects, changing shapes too fast. They cannot be poised or stationed, yet the shape of objects seems to surround them in an incongruous manner, in shadows, which is obvious. But shadows also do not have a beginning or end, only a point where the artist says or decides the shadow will start or finish. The shadows and the light are like currents in a stream that surround the rocks. Only objects like jars retain their shape, while the movement of light and shadow are not so apparent. Entry number 10, December 20th, 1975, 10 to 10:30 a.m. There is no equivocation with the painting when it is finished. You can agree or disagree with words in a book, but the painting statement is itself beyond such values as agreement or disagreement. A painting is a physical statement, and a natural one, a result of the highest coordination between mind, brain, eye, hands, and environment, in which these elements all come together in some way beyond our knowing, and create or evolve new combinations not in nature before. Even the greatest copyist cannot copy a painting perfectly, for his own individuality will betray him, and there will be variances. An artist cannot even copy his own painting perfectly for the same reason. He has changed in the meantime as the landscape or the world changes. So in this regard, he is not the same man who painted the original picture. Beyond this, though, hand, eye, mind, and environment will not meet in the same way again. A man's experiences are invisibly included in his paintings, perhaps through neurological responses that affect his brush strokes, and even his choices of colors, so that a painting has invisible components upon which the visible one rides, and these, like psychological undercoatings, can never be duplicated. Painting is a kind of language in images, perhaps as natural a communication as the tracks that an animal leaves behind him in snow or soft ground, an intimate tracing of experience, the tracks of a soul through creation. The animal tracks make a pattern and leave a trail. The artist creates his tracks psychologically with conscious purpose, and they exist in a different kind of medium. Even an animal's tracks, while imprinted into the ground and made of it, change the ground. So an artist's tracks change the environment in the same way, physically and psychologically. It may be seen to an artist that one painting leads to another, yet when his life is done, then it is easy to see that his work forms a greater pattern. For while an animal's tracks must go from place to place, an artist's mind can leap backwards and forward. So an artist does not learn his own art equally. That is, there is seldom an equal development, but a coming together of elements in a particular way. For that matter, if everything in a painting is equally developed, then there is a monotony, for even brilliance needs an uneven quality. In a good painting, a great painting, something overrides what the artist thinks of as his own knowledge or development, and he must know when to allow himself to be overridden in this manner. Entry number 11, December 21, 1975, 11 till noon. All paintings are religious paintings, created out of the mystery of existence, giving evidence for the unseen creator of the world, just as the painting gives evidence for the artist, even when he is not physically present. But religions, as organizations, are like all organizations. They seek to reduce mystery to the conventionalized, while at the same time claiming it as their own. So the artist's painting is his religion. The priests have rules that they themselves devised, a kind of holy book of etiquette, telling each person how to relate to God in any and all circumstances, even including the words to be used, as if first of all words were necessary. In religious art, everything is standardized and has inner symbolic meaning, not the artist's but the church's meaning. In the days of the old Grand Masters, the artists had to be crafty enough to use the church's symbolism while rising above it at the same time. In using it, they dismissed it in some cases by overstating it, in others by grotesquely being docile to it in a slavish way. But the great masters used the church's symbolism and did not, after all, let it use them. They let it contain their art, used it as a framework in which they poured their creativity. So great that the symbols transcended the meant meanings. The great masters constantly confounded the authorities, scandalized them, and there was always a double entendre, so that in giving the authorities what they wanted, Michelangelo and Da Vinci, for example, gave them what they did not want at the same time. But so cleverly was this mixture interwoven that no legitimate complaints could be made. Art was, then, also a political game to whatever extent. The artist producing his paintings while remaining true to the integrity of his ability, but often knowing the unscrupulous uses to which his art was put. The intrigues of popes, petty lords, and kings overshadowed the work of any well-known artist. Yet, for all of that, an artist was encouraged. He was even considered a necessary member of society, and his favor was courted. The force of the state and religion together upheld him. If artists were at the church's beck and call, still the artist was a powerful man. His art lifted him above the masses. Lords fought over him, and his life was fraught with excitement. His work was shown in places of power, in the churches and courtyards and the town halls, from the largest and smallest towns and villages. The old masters felt their passions roused and poured them into their work. Those paintings contained all of the artist's belief and disbelief, all of their religious exaltation and contempt, all of their doubts. Their greatness cracked the symbols open, and they, the symbols, would never be the same again. Through their work, the great masters of that time portrayed the vast chasms between faith and doubt that besieged their civilization. The hopes for one church and one way of salvation flared, exploded brilliantly, and passed away. So did that focus through which Michelangelo burned his hole in history, and never again did artists have the power and force of the church against which to thrust their own vision. The great masters of that time were the focus for centuries of Christendom, caught between rooted faith and rampaging skepticism, creating religious masterpieces for scoundrels. And in the artists, most of all, there yawned a chasm of belief and doubt. The artist, Michelangelo, the sculptor, Michelangelo, knew well that for all his vision, his work was used for political, not religious purposes. Cynicism toward the exterior church made him question, yet his own creativity and his own faith in being were constantly reinforced as he worked. A rift opened up in his soul in which faith and doubt formed a creative force that the world has never known since. With all of that, I believe, there will be other such peaks. Jars, apples, hillsides, and rocks are quite as much a part of God's creation as angels. And since physical objects are right in front of us, God must have wanted us to take notice. Perhaps Once again, our vision has become standardized in a different fashion so that an artist looks at objects and between them at the same time in search of an inner world that he once supposed was inhabited by angels. By the middle of that week, oh, that's the end of that entry. Okay, back to Jane. By the middle of that week, it was obvious that there was too much material for me to type up and prepare in a small book for Rob. And I didn't know how much more was coming. For that matter, on December 22nd, Cezanne seemed to have vanished psychologically or otherwise. Nothing happened on the 23rd either. In the meantime, I was busy with the holiday preparations. I promised Rob that after the holidays, I would put Cezanne in some kind of cover, maybe add a few drawings of my own, and give it to him for our anniversary, which was the 27th. Christmas came and went, and I surprised Rob by getting him a subscription TV. It snowed that day. He came in after shoveling, shivering. He made coffee, and he sat down to see what was on television. I held my breath, wondering if he'd try different channels and discover that the usual dead ones worked. He did, and his delighted whoops of laughter were louder than the soundtrack. So he liked his present. But now and then I kept rummaging through the contents of my mind to see if Cezanne were hiding there, as if his manuscript had been misplaced in some forgotten psychological corner. Once I thought with a bit of sarcasm that maybe Cezanne went away for the holidays. Oh my, so that's the end of that chapter. Oh, that was thrilling, I thought. I hope you liked it, and yeah, I hope it continues in this way. So please like and subscribe. That would help me enormously. And till soon.